Welcome to the New Hampshire Union Leaders Voters First Forums. My name is Joe McQuaid, publisher of the Union Leader.
And I'm Todd Fahey, State Director of AARP New Hampshire. AARP is a nonpartisan advocacy organization. We're looking forward to hearing candidate positions on important issues. This year, we're focused on Social Security and what candidates will do to ensure that this program remains strong and available for future generations.
If you're watching this live on YouTube, feel free to submit a question. And now, let's hear from a candidate. So thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Candidate Ashooh. I'm here with Trent Spinner, our executive editor, and Dan Toohey, our famed political reporter. And they are going to be joining with me in asking you questions. And we also expect that we'll get some from the live audience, unionleader.com, YouTube. So beware.
Wonderful.
And we hope this will be for about an hour. And I want to start off with the elephant in the room. And that would be one Donald Trump. And I know that you have said that you are supporting Donald Trump, but not endorsing him. Yesterday, I spoke with a gentleman who was a respected, long-term New Hampshire elected public servant, now retired, who was supposed to be having his picture taken with you this week, but he said, and unless and until, and he used much more colorful language than I will, renounce that SOB, he's not going to do it. So, like it or not, Trump is an issue.
Yes.
Are you going to continue to support him? Are you going to renounce him? Or what?
Yeah, let's talk about what's happened. In the past 2 weeks, Donald Trump became the nominee. And you're not going to find a more supportive person of past nominees than me. I've worked hard for the party. And so, there's two things that I am pretty certain of. One is I am not voting for Hillary Clinton. And I think that, Americans just need to know that, despite all the turmoil at the top of the ticket, another 4 years of Obama, which is essentially what we're talking about here, is simply untenable. And I've always said I would support the nominee because that's what I've always done. But here's the deal. The nominee needs to make the case to the voters why they should be the next president. And not being Hillary Clinton isn't enough. I'm running to be the nominee for the 1st District. I am trying to make the case to the voters of the 1st District why they should put their faith in me. And Republicans, now that he's the nominee, need Donald Trump to do that. And he's not doing a very good job of that. So my support is contingent on him doing a better job than he's been doing. He's shaken the establishment now, and for very good reason. And I think that's something that he has to take a serious look at and address better.
Okay.
What will it take for you to pull your support for the GOP nominee? I mean, Republicans from John McCain, Kelly Ayotte said she was appalled by his comments. Is there anything that this nominee can say that won't have your support for him?
He is already at a deficit with me. He said things that I believe are, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting to hear an explanation for the POW comment, way back when. But the reason why I haven't said very much about this is he wasn't the nominee. Now that he's the nominee, we are looking to him to do and say certain things that will inspire voters and not turn them off. This is about getting more support than the other person. And merely having somebody like Hillary Clinton, again, truly problematic nominee. Let's admit it, both sides are having their struggles. On the Democratic side, they almost nominated someone with an ideology that is truly troubling, and we don't really talk about that very much. So instead they've gone with Hillary Clinton, who again, would be a disaster. On the Republican side, now that he is the nominee, I have certain expectations of him, and quite frankly, I need to see him meet those expectations, and right now he's not.
Let's talk about the other elephant in the room, which is that you are running against a sitting Republican congressman. What are your issues with Frank Inton?
Well, I'm running because I think we've got certain problems that I can help solve that have not been solved. If you look at the major things, really entrenched problems in America, one is certainly our fiscal house is in disorder. Haven't balanced the budget in more than 20 years. Frank Kinta's been on the budget committee, and yet we're still struggling to get a balanced budget plan. National security, huge issue for me, something I've spent my life in. I think I bring things to the table on national security that are necessary now. Our national security situation, our national defense situation, global terrorism, these things have gotten worse, not better, over the years. And I think it's because we haven't been electing the kind of people who have, the experience to help solve these issues. So I believe I do. Finally, on the economy, businesses, employees, investors, innovators, they're all frustrated with where we are as a nation on the economy. The economy is struggling, but it should be surging. And there are reasons why it's not surging that government can actually do something about, and yet hasn't. When are we going to give Americans a break on taxes? We've still got the most uncompetitive tax code in the globe. That's addressable. We haven't addressed it. We've got regulations taking over businesses. And this is on top of the ones that we already had. But now we're seeing an administration on its way out the door, legacy building. And so we're seeing, regulation proposed on wages, on environment, so many other things. It's not enough having a Republican majority, clearly. We have that, and yet things are not being solved. So we need to elect the right kind of Republican. And I think that means having someone with decades of experience in the private sector who's been living under a lot of these initiatives and knows what to do to change them.
You mentioned a host of issues there. One that you didn't mention is Social Security. Are you hearing anything about Social Security in this cycle? Yes or no? And have you got any plans to update or change Social Security?
I do, and I will tell you, I'm not hearing enough. I will tell you, when I bring it up, the response, and when I bring it up, it's in terms of not just Social Security, it's all entitlements need work. I mean, the problem that we had when President Obama came into office, rather than address our broken entitlements, he created another one on top of it. So the situation, again, has only worsened. And these are problems that are very, very hard to solve the longer you wait. Social Security in particular needs to be there for people, but it needs to be reformed because it was designed for another age, another time. And this has traditionally been a third rail issue. It can't be. Politicians need to stand up and say what they're going to do. I happen to believe that you can go at this one of two ways. You can tinker with the system that we have now to make it more solvent, which would involve raising retirement age, raising taxes, basically working with the system that's in place, only try to make it last a little bit longer. I think we should take a more fundamental approach. First of all, fundamental to any Social Security reform is to ensure that anybody who's nearing receiving those benefits or receiving benefits, we don't go anywhere near that. We have to preserve the program for those who are depending on it. But what I would like to do is reflect the realities of the modern workforce. People now live longer, work in different places more, and are very, very innovative. They like to care about where their money's going and why. And my view is a system that rewards those things is one that will be far more financially sound rather than one that actually cuts and tweaks and does other things that will, might extend the life a little bit. But if we can make a system that's more portable, that allows people to take some ownership over the money they invest and augment it, I think that's going to create a system that people can believe in.
Is there any current proposal that is attractive to you along those lines?
So I haven't seen a proposal that is of the nature that I'm discussing, which is more of a hybrid. There are some people who say, well, we should take Social Security and privatize it, and I'm not there yet. And then we've seen other proposals that are more along the tweaking line, and I'm not in favor of that either. I think a system that, again, protects current beneficiaries and then allows people to choose a basic standard of benefits or a program that allows you to take ownership and be rewarded for working longer and paying in and doing other things. That, to me, is a better system. So right now, I'm not really seeing much out there. These are ideas that I've generated.
Right. They keep on talking about these solutions, and you talked about the federal deficit, et cetera.
Yeah.
When are we going to go over the cliff.
We already have.
Yeah.
You could argue that we already have. So $19 trillion of debt is what we're carrying now. And that is just the debt that the public owes. The fact of the matter is the U.S. government owes itself even more. So we've got, the debt picture is worse than it's being portrayed. And in terms of real money, what does that mean? Well, interest on the debt, that's something everybody can understand, right? If you have a credit card, you pay interest and you can see, and it costs you money and it goes for nothing. Interest on the debt is right now about $230 billion annually, with interest rates actually historically low. So if the Fed acts in the way we think they're going to act, those interest rates are going to go up. The cost to the American taxpayers on debt service, I mean, $230 billion as a floor, we're talking about an amount of money that's bigger than most federal agencies. So this is a huge drain on us, but it's also a drain on the economy, because businesses are not going to invest in the U.S. with taxes as high as they are, and with that financial picture that we're looking at, because they know, why invest when money will just be taken away from you? So they're hoarding. We can't have that. We need businesses to invest in the economy and drive economic growth. Can't balance the budget without that behavior, by the way, because we're not going to be able to just cut our way out of this. We have to grow our way out of this.
Rich, you said earlier the first district needs to elect the right Republican. Inherent in that statement is that Frank Gintis is the wrong Republican. Can you name a single vote which Frank Gintis got it wrong?
Sure. I think that, and by the way, that isn't really the issue. It's not really about votes, because anybody can show up and vote. Voting is, I know it's an easy measure, but the fact of the matter is anybody can show up and vote, and I've never accused Frank of not being of being disloyal to the Republican leadership at voting time. That's not the issue. I disagree with him on free trade. He voted for fast track. I wouldn't have done that. I think that we can do far better on free trade than we've seen, and I think that's a case where we differ. But what I will say is, he sat on the budget committee, and we haven't had a balanced budget. He sat on financial services, yet he has his own financial issues, and in fact is in a position to regulate people that we expect the highest level of behavior from, and yet he has his own issues. So my view is trust in American government is failing right now, and that is why voters are so angry and frustrated. They're looking for people who can relate to the problems that they have. Having been in the private sector most of my career, I can certainly do that, and those are solutions that I can help bring to the table.
Just a quick follow-up. What questions do you still have with Frank Gintis' finances?
I don't think I have any questions. I think it's all out there. The problem is that he's not being forthcoming. And again, not why I'm running. I'm running to solve problems, but it's another elephant in the room, to use your term, because I'm hearing it from voters everywhere. It's hard to take the Democrats to task for their own ethical issues if we as Republicans don't have our own house in order. And in the case of the current incumbent, we don't.
Did I hear you say that you would have voted against the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
I would have voted against Fast Track. Fast Track essentially, so we've had this administration for 8 years. I think, like a lot of Americans, when President Obama showed up, we were willing to give him some running room. But now we know that there's very little that I'm willing to entrust to this administration on almost anything, in particular free trade. This is not part of his DNA. I mean, he's ill-suited to be commander-in-chief. He's ill-suited to grow the economy. And on free trade, I think this is one of these things where Congress needed to keep a tighter leash, and Fast Track undoes that. So that's where I would have differed.
So if you were in Congress, what would you have done?
What I would have done is not abdicate congressional authority and truly make sure that this is a free trade deal. The concept's not a bad one. The idea of putting economic pressure on, say, China by establishing better relationships with other trading partners in the region, I think that's generally a good thing. I am pro-free trade, but that doesn't mean I support Congress taking itself out of the oversight role, which I think that vote does. I think Congress needs to be very involved in this. And I would also say, we shouldn't look at these things in a silo, meaning, whether to give the president authority on something like, Fast Track. This administration has done some things in particular on national security, an area that Congress has traditionally been deferential to. foreign policy, national security, Congress tends to defer to the president. But when the president goes awry, Congress needs to stand up. And when Congress needs to stand up, it needs to use the tools that it has: spending, oversight, free trade approval. So my view is Congress hasn't been using its powers. Otherwise, things like the Iran nuclear deal wouldn't have happened. So there's a bigger picture here that I think we need to make sure we are aware of on these issues.
TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Yeah,
you're against that?
that's what I was just talking about.
Right.
No, I support the
That's what I'm
concept,
clear.
but I would not vote for it without congressional involvement, and that we did not have.
That said, do you feel that the administration and Hillary Clinton, if she's elected, will somehow push this through?
I have no idea. It'll depend on the kind of Congress we have. If I'm a congressman, they're going to have a tough time putting it through if it's the kind of deal that I would expect from this administration.
You worked for BAE for how long?
More than 20 years.
They do a lot of defense contract work. Does a Congressman Ashooh or Cashew, as your friend Phyllis Woods is saying,
Whatever people remember.
as long as it's good.
Yeah.
Does a Congressman Ashooh remove himself from voting on things that BAE is involved with?
Oh, no. I'm running to be the congressman from New Hampshire. That means representing New Hampshire's largest manufacturer and a world leader in global electronic warfare. I mean, that's definitely something you don't want to. I want people to vote for me because I'm going to represent them. But here's the thing. They're not alone. Southern New Hampshire in particular, and many companies in the 1st District, are home to incredible technology. And it's an ecosystem that we have. Obviously, BAE Systems, Sanders, when I started, has been a generator of a lot of that. But it exists on so many levels, large companies, small companies, that all of them need representation. All of them need somebody who intuitively understands the challenges of deploying technology against rapidly evolving threats into a large, red tape-laden bureaucracy. That is what I'm going to bring to the table. I've demonstrated an ability to do that and would do it here for everybody.
So why don't we just explain for people, what exactly did you do for BAE?
Yeah, so again, long career, more than 20 years. I got my start working in public affairs, which had many things to do. You worried about the community, but most of my career was spent on ensuring that the programs that we worked on were adequately funded and were known to the warfighters. Think about this. We're an advanced technology company. The Pentagon is looking to us to come up with the right answers. They only have needs. They don't know what the right technology answers are. So we're going to come up with things that they haven't thought of yet. And it's our job to make sure that they know about them. Now, a lot of times, it's interesting. Federal government can be a lot like, it can be a large bureaucracy, and there are a lot of people who protect themselves and protect jobs, their jobs, and protect the status quo. So it really, I know it sounds like it ought to be an easy thing to do, which is to take this new way of doing things. But oftentimes it's a little bit iconoclastic and you have to go in and shake things up a little bit. But most of my career was spent on doing that. I was fortunate to have, to do some non-traditional things when I was there. My last 5 years were really spent on more strategic role. In particular, as we sort out the new threat environment that we're dealing with. It was a different thing when you're dealing with large monolithic threats. Now we're trying to deal with, it takes the form of ISIS now, but the fact of the matter is, for several years we've been dealing with radical Islamic terrorism, and it's a threat that our warfighters and certainly our innovators in industry are still trying to stay on top of.
Are there no large monolithic threats?
Well, they are, there just shouldn't be. Russia is resurgent, and shouldn't be, right? I was remarking to someone the other day that in 1980, when Ronald Reagan received the nomination, we were coming off a presidency with a completely sluggish economy, a president who was ill-suited to the threats we were dealing with. We were getting pushed around by the Russians and the Iranians. Ronald Reagan came in with a clear vision, strong conservative ideals, a Congress that was supportive, and we kicked off this amazing expansion. So I hold those memories close because I think we can do that again. It's troubling that we have to. It's troubling that we're dealing with the same characters on the national security stage, plus some. But that is the price we pay for electing people who are not suited to do the job and solve the problems that we have.
How long should they, in the first district, elect Congressman Ashooh, or do you think voluntary term limits or something that should happen?
Yeah, I do. I mean, as you pointed out, I've had a career in business, and it's a very meaningful career in business to me. So, you know, this isn't part of my career. I really feel motivated by the problems that we have. And, you know, my hope is in 3 or 4 terms to have certainly turned those things around, maybe even shorter. But that's why I'm going. It's not for longevity, it's for progress.
Just going back to an answer, a few answers ago, you were talking about the status quo in Washington, how difficult it is to work around it. And I think what we've seen from the electorate is that people are looking for an outsider. People are looking for someone who can change the status quo.
Yep.
So how do you make that argument to voters that, hey, I've worked in DC for 20 years, but now I want to represent you and I want to change things?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure if you beat Ginta and you face a Democrat in the fall, that is going to be sort of the mantra.
Yeah.
That you're
Yeah.
a DC insider, lobbyist, and he doesn't represent you.
Yeah, so, you know, there's a reason why I live and work in New Hampshire. It's because this is the real world. And there's simply no getting around it. You know, spending more than 20 years, you know, living with the rules and laws and regs that we've seen government implement has really shaped me. But it's also shaped what I know needs to be done. You don't want to send someone down who doesn't know what they're doing. And I worked for 2 U.S. senators right when I graduated from college. One was Gordon Humphrey, the other was Warren Rudman. Think back, both men on their own issues were highly regarded and looked to as leaders. If you wanted on Soviet issues and life, issues of life, Gordon Humphrey. On fiscal responsibility, Warren Rudman. They were known, and if there was a vote or something like that, and they were leaders, they generated things. You know, it was, you know, they made things happen, and their other colleagues looked to them. Remember, at the end of the day, why did people look to them? One was that they both took the time to know what they were doing, and 2, they remained committed to their ideals. And I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for people who have some relevant experience, know what they're doing, and will be committed to them. The things I'm talking about, I mean, you know, fiscal responsibility has been something I've been concerned about since my days back then. The difference was, you know, in the mid-'80s when I was working for Senator Rudman, you know, we thought $3 trillion of debt was too much. And it was only 30% of our GDP at that time. Now it's 70% of our GDP. We have to turn this around. National security, I mean, I've been, you know, I'm proud to be in this industry, but I don't want to say I'm fortunate to have been in this industry because you wish you didn't have to play cat and mouse with terrorists. But that's what I've been having to do in industry. And I believe that we need some congressmen who understand that fight. Otherwise, we simply won't make the progress because, as I said, it's not just about party labeling here. It's about getting some people who are committed to certain ideals and have the background to back them up.
Rich, does defeating ISIS mean deploying more boots on the ground in Syria and in the Middle East?
No, what it means is never taking that option off the table and doing it when you say you're going to do it. One of the big problems we have right now is a crisis of confidence, not only in our military, but among our allies. And we have been dealing with radical Islamic terrorism in one form or another, right? Right now we know it is ISIS. But the fact of the matter is you could take Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Taliban. It's had many names. Even back to the mid-'80s with back to the 80s with Ronald Reagan. What we did wrong is that we set red lines and didn't keep them, that we took our eye off the ball. This administration did something called the pivot, which was turn away from the Mideast back in 2011 and pay attention, or attempt to pay attention, to Asia Pacific. That distraction precipitated the rise of ISIS. So before we start doing things right, we have to stop doing certain things wrong. And in this case, fighting radical Islamic terrorism is going to take several things that we need to do right. Our force structure is still not properly attuned to deal with this kind of a threat. Our allies are still completely shaken, and we can't win this without them. And then finally, we really do need to tackle the ideology. You know, that's why there's so much self-radicalization, is that the terrorists have become very adept at messaging across the globe in a way that creates more threats. And I think we need to do a better job of countering that, countering the ideology. That's not necessarily going to be done with bullets and bombs. It will be done by having a commitment to our global partners, because we're going to need their help in this.
Along the same lines, do you have complete confidence that the U.S. is properly screening refugees into this country?
No, I don't. And by the way, neither does the director of the FBI, who essentially said as much. You know, so the refugee problem is certainly a case where we have to be very careful, because when I talk about hearts and minds and the ideology, you know, one thing you want to be careful of is still remain the humanitarian nation that we've always been known at, back to the Marshall Plan to today. But if our allies are not comfortable with our strategy, you know, the large majority of refugees are in places like Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon. We need to make sure we ensure that we're as helpful to them as we can, so that we can limit the vast numbers of refugees who are trying to come in. Take stress off the system, but even so, it's a stress system. And I'm not confident at all, based on the director's comments, that we're doing everything we need to do.
What do we do about it?
Well, part of it needs to be, you know, examining where the resource issue is. I'm sure there's a resource issue, but the fact of the matter is, it's another example where working with our partners. In any intelligence establishment, there's no substitute for proper coordination. Yet, we're talking about a very siloed type of, you know, everybody wants to control their own information. And if we're not in trusting relationships with allies in ways that we can properly share information, because garbage in, garbage out, you know, if we have good information going into the system, you know, into a screening system, that's going to be much better off for us than we are now. But right now, again, that morale, not only amongst our partners, but within the intelligence component. You know, why was Hillary Clinton's email issue so troubling? Well, it was because she was held to a different standard than anybody who's in the intelligence establishment and deals with classified information would be held. That just devastates the morale of the intel component, and doesn't bring out the best in them. So there's many, many things we need to get right there.
There's a refugee concern, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on how many refugees from war-torn areas the United States is supposed to accept. And there's an overall immigration issue and concern. Are there hard numbers on how many immigrants you think should be admitted to the country each year, and under what programs and for what purposes?
Yeah, I don't. I just think that, I don't think there's a hard number. I think it's a number that should be declining every year. The numbers, right, are not the issue. It's the source, it's the cause. And, you know, if you do engage militarily, you know, what should the goal be? Well, it certainly be to defeat terrorism, but it also means to create breathing room in the countries that are, you know, causing this refugee crisis, so that we don't have the influx. That's where the congressional focus needs to be. You know, the numbers of refugees, that we'd be talking about would be much higher if we didn't have allies doing what they're doing now, and they are under stress. So my focus would certainly be on, let's have them not be refugees here in the U.S. Let's try to keep them closer to home. That's where they want to be, and still maintain the humanitarian ideals that we've had as a nation.
What committees could Congressman Ashooh want to serve on, and as a freshman be able to serve on, that best help the First District?
Well, we're blessed to have an incredible state, an incredible district. There is so much going on here. We've already talked about the incredible work on national security that goes on, and certainly being on the Armed Services Committee would be very helpful to that. But financial services, with this incredible, robust, diverse, fidelity, but all the way down, innovators. We have so many different industries. Manufacturing is coming back in ways that I think we'd all be pleased to see. So to me, it's less about the particular committee. There's all kinds of committees that you could be helpful on, and more about being a leader no matter what committee you're on. And I'm confident in my ability to do that.
What do we do with the nearly 11 million illegal immigrants in the country? Should we build a wall Do you support a pathway to citizenship?
So, no on the pathway to citizenship. And as far as the wall goes, I mean, that to me means securing the border. And if you're talking about people who are in the country, that's a different issue. But thank you for the lead-in. You don't do anything other than deporting those who are illegal here. But from a policy perspective, you don't do anything without securing the border first. There's any kind of advancement on immigration is going to take people coming together, and there is going to be a large push to as you say, deal with the 11 million here. Before you ever do that, we have not properly secured this border. We've seen failure after failure of the government trying to implement not a wall, but the equivalent of a wall, border security, and it's failed. Part of the reason it's failed is, again, this is the government doing something it's not very good at. And when they're not very good at something, you need to get the people who are. And I think that's also true in Congress. But secondly, we have to decrease demand. We still have sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, employers who flout the law and continue to create the demand for illegal immigrants that, again, stress our system. If you deal with the demand, it makes it easier to secure the border, and it also makes it easier to deal with the people who are in the country illegally.
So if the president, if you're in Congress and the president asks you to vote for the greatest wall that's ever been built, no matter what the cost, is that something?
No, there's never a no matter what the cost. I just got through telling you I'm a fiscal conservative, and finding the right way to do this in a innovative, affordable way has to be part of the deal.
Would you support additional federal limits on purchases of firearms? Do you think any are appropriate?
No, we don't. That is not the issue. We right now, we do not need more gun laws. We've got a number of laws on the books. I am concerned over, and this gets back to federal enforcement of gun laws. I do believe we need to do better at enforcing the laws we have, but my supposition is that you're referring to incidents that have occurred over the past few months, which are truly troubling. But I don't believe the answer is to take more rights away from law-abiding Americans on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment keeps us safe, and we don't want to mess with that.
Which federal laws do you think need more enforcement?
So we saw an example in Orlando where the shooter was investigated on multiple occasions by the FBI and deemed not a threat. I don't know what good laws are if we're not implementing them correctly. And that's a case, tragically, where we didn't. And further tragically, the sides on gun control issues went right to the Senate floor to start having that debate without fully understanding what really went on there. And we've seen so many other incidents which we know require a better system for identifying individuals who are threats. That's where we need to be paying our attention. As a member of Congress, I would be asking questions along those lines that still have not been asked.
How does BAE vet its employees to make sure that it is not hiring illegal immigrants?
So, happily, I was in charge with that, but most big companies participate in E-Verify system. It's not just BAE, but they.
Most big companies. What's the problem with E-Verify that it is not in place nationally for every employer?
I don't know. I don't know what the problem with it is. But
explain E-Verify.
Yeah. Well, so it's a system. It's a system of vetting employees. Which they, it's a thing with like, pre-check, if anyone's familiar with TSA pre-check. Yeah, that's how it ought to work. But it is one of those things that need.
TSA pre, you should be a man of the people and stand in the longest line possible.
So you talk about vetting employees, and in order to work in the industry that I work in, I had to give up my secrets a long time ago to get a security clearance. So there's no loss to me to sign up for pre. They already have my fingerprints, and I've also noticing so many more Americans are doing pre-check. There's no advantage to the line anymore.
Don't say that,
Yeah.
please.
Oh yeah, no, there's
But
no.
it is going to get that way.
Yeah.
So on E-Verify,
Yeah.
it's a program that runs the person's identity, social security number, et cetera, through a system. And I understand it doesn't take a long time to do that.
Yeah.
So why is that not the law, that I, the union leader, or the guy at Bunny's Superette, has to, anybody he hires, run them through each?
Yeah, well, that ought to clearly be part of any future, immigration discussion. As I said, the employers are part of the problem. They're part of the problem. They, some of them, it's entirely possible that they fought against that law. There's, right now the system supports people flouting the law. There's economic interests involved in that. And, Congress needs to take a very hard look at that. Republicans especially, don't like to take on large employers, but this is a case where we absolutely need to have an honest conversation about it.
Okay. Let's talk about some stuff happening in the news. Zika in Florida now.
Mm-hmm.
What is Congress's role?
Congress's role on any threat is to make sure that the experts are fully focused on it and have the resources to do it. And also that the threat is appropriately monitored. So it's possible to overreact to certain things, and it's also possible to underreact to certain things. You bring up Zika. That's something that needs, CDC needs to be paying attention to it. I get it. I flew to Nicaragua earlier in January. No one had really heard about Zika. On my way there, I was told about this mosquito-borne thing that we need to pay attention to. And since then, it's now on everybody's mind, and the awareness is a good thing.
Well, if you listen to the national media, they talk about how Obama wanted another 1-point-something million to fight Zika in particular. And the mean old Congress wouldn't give it to him and went home and isn't coming back to September. What is your understanding of the validity of that statement?
Well, I'm inclined to be supportive of Congress's role on this because it's impossible to me to believe that there isn't enough money in the system to deal with the nascent threat.
Said, which is that they could redirect funds that have already been appropriated for CDC, et cetera, to the particular problem, rather than another problem which can take its turn in line.
This is what drives me crazy about federal spending. We know in any given year there's going to be a certain number of unanticipated things. Hurricanes, floods, potential diseases, things. We know that we don't necessarily know what they're going to be, we just know there are going to be some. And yet we're seemingly unable to budget for those contingencies when businesses do it all the time. Other governmental organizations do it all the time. Instead, we're overspending by $1 trillion a year, and that's still not enough. So that's a culture shift that needs to change. I believe there are some good people in Congress who get that, but this is a case where some outsider perspective will be very helpful because nobody budgets like this.
We had a Reuters piece in the paper yesterday, which my wife had to call to my attention, about MIT has developed a way to very quickly and rapidly come up with an immunization for various diseases, including Zika. It's a new form of biology, if you will. The story didn't say that it required any more money. It just said that there was some testing involved that had to be done.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that, and is it the kind of thing that resources should be applied to?
So I've not heard of that, and I'm glad to know that your wife does what my wife does, which is constantly put things in front of me that I should be paying attention to. So half the time it's your column too. But the behavior, that is precious behavior, where you had a bunch of smart people at MIT who saw a problem and on their own initiative, I'm assuming on their own, because I know this behavior and I'm willing to believe this is what they did. They said, you know what, we've got something that can solve that. I see that all the time. I saw it in my industry, and I see it all across the state. People come up with these great ideas to problems that they've identified without government saying, we have this requirement, We have this need. We're going to put a bunch of money against it. Now, why don't you guys come in and let us know what you got? We need to be incentivizing the other behavior. There is no problem that we can't solve by rewarding innovation and not driving it through government, picking winners and losers. So that's, I mean, if there are resources to be applied, it's going to be to open the channels for ideas like that to come forward, and not to try to, orchestrate them. Again, it's an area where government just has no idea what it's doing. Let the people who know what they're doing do it.
The heroin epidemic. Obviously a huge issue here.
Yes.
What do you think you could do in D.C. to help people who are dying here in New Hampshire? Yeah,
it's still dying. It's very hard to find anybody in New Hampshire who hasn't personally been affected by this. And having said that, and there's been many things done, most of them by individuals, similar to what your example, individuals on the ground who see a need and deal with it. I was visiting Hope on Haven Hill in Rochester, and that's an example where two incredible women saw a need, and the need was for support and services to pregnant women suffering from substance abuse disorder. Apparently there was no way to be helpful in that case. And so they saw the need, they're trying to deal with it. They are not getting the resources they need to fully implement what they're trying to do, even though the resources are there. It's not waiting on necessarily some large appropriation from Congress. That is what I'm going to do. What any other crisis we would deal with as a crisis, nearly 500 people a year, that's the average of deaths that we're having. That's a crisis. So let's treat it like one. If we're losing that many people in any other capacity, if we had had a snowstorm or a hurricane or a tornado that killed that many people, we would have gone into action to deal with the recovery. In this case, we need something similar. We need emergency powers, right? You declare a state of emergency after a large incident. We need something equivalent here. Not to throw more money, but to, what does a federal state of emergency do? It opens the channels, it cuts through red tape, it allows what's there to flow better. And then you can determine whether or not it's enough. That has not happened in this case, and it needs to. There are resources in the system that could be implemented if you cut through the red tape and treat this thing like an emergency. Now that's one thing. The other thing is federal role. I mean, we are talking about criminal activity, criminal drug trade. I have complete confidence in New Hampshire law enforcement to maintain control over their jurisdictions, but that's not where this thing is. Their jurisdictions, the problem straddles jurisdictions. It goes to Lawrence, Mass. It goes to Mexico, where the imports come in. It goes to China, where the components for fentanyl come from. We have to attack the supply chain for this issue, and that is a congressional role. So those are the two big areas that I think that Congress can do something about, which it currently isn't doing.
So you've been familiarizing yourself with this issue.
Unfortunately, it's something that I've had to become familiar with, yes.
How much of this problem do you think really lies with kids or adults who got their molars pulled or broke a bone and relied on OxyContin and then switched to this? And how much is something else?
I've heard too many anecdotes of that nature for me to not believe it's a huge part of the problem. Overprescribing is a huge part of the problem. I have met directly with people suffering from substance abuse disorder, and over I hear that story. It started this way, I became addicted, and this was the cheapest way to solve the addiction. I hear it over and over. It has to be part of the issue. And quite frankly, we do need to address it. And I know, look, up until I ran, was on the board at Catholic Medical Center and spent a lot of time with medical professionals. There's a culture to help people, help alleviate pain. So we want to be careful about assigning blame anywhere, but we need to grow the awareness of overprescribing.
Catholic Medical Center ever been asked or stepped up to fill the supposed void that Chris Sununu says Planned Parenthood can only fulfill? in eastern New Hampshire, that they were the only ones who would fulfill these basic women's health needs?
Yeah, all I know is they should be asked to do it. You know, whether they've been asked, I don't know. But the fact that we're beholden to this one agency as the sole provider of women's health services, to me, doesn't make any sense. Again, look to the environment we're in here in New Hampshire. Catholic Medical Center, fabulous healthcare provider. Many others in southern New Hampshire. The idea that we can't somehow solve that problem without relying on, a controversial and troubled organization like Planned Parenthood is beyond me.
Go ahead.
You spoke earlier about, and you said it before, about tearing down silos in government. What federal agencies would you like to see reduced, gutted, or even abolished?
EPA is out of control. Department of Energy is out of control. Both of them think that they're in the wrong business. I mean, Department of Energy thinks it's in the job of creating energy. The fact of the matter is, if you look at where real innovation comes from, it doesn't come from the Department of Energy. Department of Energy. The example I use is, what if the federal government had its act together enough to create a Department of the Internet? We wouldn't have the internet we have today, right? We'd have this, kludgy thing, right? But instead, it's been that free-flowing, driver of the economy that it is. I'm less focused on eliminating agencies, because I think that's a good red meat thing. I'll get rid of this department, that department. I'm focused on programs. There are programs that simply do not need to exist, and it's across all the agencies. But the fact of the matter is, you can even just start with redundancy and certainly deal with that. I mean, there are redundant health programs, but all within the Department of Defense. But EPA right now, OSHA, they are on a tear inserting themselves into businesses in the local economy. That's where I would be starting. And I'm not a big fan of regulatory reform, because again, that's sort of like eliminating agencies. It never seems to get done. I would be going after specific programs that are driving a lot of the regs that are choking businesses off.
Okay.
How about Veterans Affairs? There's no full-service VA here in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
You say you're a fiscal conservative?
Yeah.
Where's the balance there?
Yeah. The balance there is going back to the discussion we just had about the incredible health care that exists in the private sector. My view is, look, there are many positive stories that come out of the VA medical system. I've talked to a lot of veterans. A lot of them are my friends. You referred to one at the beginning, a certain former senator. And I spent
didn't say senator.
Yeah, well, okay, all right, sorry.
Giving him up.
Yeah, he is not a shrinking violet. So, but the point is, government's in charge of something it's not very good at: the provision of medical care. I think the real answer is to open the channels for veterans to get quality help wherever it exists, especially if it's close to them. So when you have a veteran now, here in Manchester, you're right, no full-service hospital in New Hampshire. So what do they do? They have to travel. Well, there's no need to travel. There's nothing that can't be gotten in a 20-mile radius in southern New Hampshire. Yet the system doesn't support that. There's something called a Veterans Choice Card, which is basically a last resort. It shouldn't be. It should be the first resort. That, to me, is a system which not only would get them the quality care that they need, give them choice, make life easier for them, but it's also going to drive down costs in healthcare generally. Because instead of going into another siloed system, it's going to be going into the local community. Catholic Medical Center, I can't speak with authority on this, they're dying to help veterans. They're leaning forward, but they're bumping up against.
Some veterans don't want to go to private facilities. They want the VA care, and they say that when they get there, the VA care is good. The late Dave Nixon was really upset when we were doing stories critical of the VA. The VA is fine. We need more of it. Have you encountered that from veterans?
Yes, I've asked specifically, how has your treatment been? And in some cases, it's been great. A lot of it has to do with the nature of the ailment. Look, there are some things where the government, it's like on anything else. They need to do that which can't be done by others. So traumatic brain injuries. That's an area where you're probably likely to find more out of the military side. So they need to be paying attention to the things that are not necessarily being attended to by the private sector. But to me, it's about choice. There are, and don't get me wrong, there are some cases where in New Hampshire, the Veterans Home in Tilton, they hit it out of the park. These veterans are so well cared for and they're happy, and I wouldn't tinker with it for a moment. That doesn't mean that there aren't incredible, counterparts in the private sector, but it's about the choice. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to enable more choice here.
Anything else, boys?
Yes, on September 13th is the state primary. Should you win, you'll be going up against Carol Shea Porter, who's a big supporter of Obamacare. You oppose Obamacare.
I do.
What do you tell the voters in New Hampshire and those people that are on Obamacare today?
Well, I wouldn't tell them anything. I would ask them how it's going, and I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is going to be. Nothing's changed. Obamacare promised better health care at lower cost, and it hasn't delivered either. I don't need to say much about Obamacare because it's collapsing under its own weight. We're seeing exchanges go out of business, insurance companies back out. And why is all this happening? It's happening because Americans want lower cost, quality health care, which Obamacare, while it promised that, that's not what it was about. It was about insurance. Single payer insurance. That was the goal. That was also the goal of Carol Shea Porter. Remember, Obamacare didn't go far enough for her. My view is it is long overdue to start doing the things that will lower cost of health care for Americans. The system we have now, the incentives are all perverse. The systems drive up cost. It's very, very hard to figure out what things cost. If you don't know what they cost, how can you choose the low-cost option? There's so many common sense things that we can do, but you have to pay attention to them. Obamacare did something worse. Not only did it not pay attention, but it created a whole other system that's been layered on top of. I'm not going to be one of those people that says, let's go repeal Obamacare. I said that before. Republicans tried it. It failed. What we need to do is start implementing a system of choice and quality that rewards innovation. And that will effectively repeal Obamacare. I'm convinced of that.
Consumers would make the choice. You'd be able to walk into your doctor's office and
Patient-centered health care.
You could say, my checkup's going to be $99
Right.
at Dartmouth, or it's going to be $120 at Elliott. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, it is the idea. And I visited a great company in Portsmouth that just created an app that does that very thing. And it's amazing. But the system conspires against them. That right now the system that we have rewards opacity, right? It rewards that blindness that patients have. Patients have no power. They have no authority over their own health care.
Well, they're getting some. They're getting some in this state with that kind of comparison shopping. And there is actually a bonus if you go with the lower price model that is offered out there. Are you aware of this?
I'm not sure I know what you're talking about.
If I need an appendectomy
Yeah.
or anything like that, I can go to a company that our company deals with.
I see. Yeah.
And they will tell me within the geographic area of my choice who offers the service and how much the service costs.
Yeah.
And if I go with a lower priced service, Basque, for instance.
Yes, right.
Right? I get a rebate on it, and the company saves money.
Yeah.
And I think New Hampshire, as a state now, has a program. Didn't we just write about
My
this?
Medical Shopper, which is
My Medical Shop is the app that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's very new. It's the exception and not the rule.
Yeah.
We need a system based around that, which we don't have. We really don't have. I mean, you talk to them and how frustrated they are in trying to propagate the system, and it's sad because everybody sees it, loves it. It's that small innovation. Just having transparency into cost would, and then imagine a system that's built around that, health savings accounts that reward that behavior. Things would change dramatically.
I was a little distrustful the appendectomy was going to be in a laundromat on 2nd Street. The price was to die for.
Appendectomies are us. Yeah.
Yes, literally. Well, we thank you for coming in.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Good luck on the campaign trail. Anybody who goes to serve in public office these days is fine in our book.
Well, Thank you. It's an honor to serve. My parents were large on public service and encouraged us to try to help our community. And I'd like to do that. And I think right now, serving in Congress would be a way to do it. But I'll tell you, we have a lot of problems. And it's not about winning in November. It's about what we do in January. And I will try to work hard to keep and earn the trust of the voters in New Hampshire.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming
Thanks.
in.